Splitting Steel Champion used to be an amazing League starter build, easy to put together and march through the campaign all the way to the end game of Atlas mapping. But does it still feel good in 3.17, and will it carry us through into the next expansion 3.18, Sentinel? While this is not a build guide, you can treat my thoughts as a little overview of the build and high-level interest gauging from my viewers, which is the only way for me to find out if there is enough interest for me to bother producing a proper build guide for you for Splitting Steel in 3.18. Makes sense? Great. Let's take a closer look at how it plays then. Splitting Steel is one of those cool skills that I dare say are underrated, and yes, I should have included it in my list of underrated builds I've published not long ago. But there are just too many to remember all of them, I hope you understand. Choosing a League starter has a lot to do with personal preferences as well as what we actually know about the upcoming new Path of Exile expansion, Sentinel in this case, and about balance changes. Sentinel expansion is coming in May, and most of us Path of Exile players are starting to look at what League starters we'd pick for 3.18, perhaps changing from our usual good old boring choices to something we haven't played before, or maybe not played for a long while anyway. The expansion announcement is still about 10 days away, and right now we don't know much at all about Sentinel other than that we will have some sort of a permanent or semi-permanent companion or minion that will help us deal with the threats of Rayclast in 3.18. So perhaps a non-minion build would be in order to start a league with. Just a thought. We don't know yet if and which skills might be nerfed, which obviously could throw a spanner in the works if steel skills are among those. But at this stage, in the lull of 3.17 Siege of the Atlas expansion, I have personally no reasons to believe that something like Splitting Steel Champion wouldn't fare well in that next upcoming expansion. So looking closer at what Splitting Steel actually is all about and how it plays, in case you're new to Path of Exile or to using steel skills specifically, Splitting, Shattering and Lancing Steel skills, gems, are among those steel skills that have two modes, or actions if you like, attached to them. First, it's the accumulation of steel shards, which is done automatically and with the Call of Steel skill. And secondly is the shot itself, where you shoot those shards, and it often works like a shotgun, with those steel splinters firing off in a cone in front of you, bouncing off the walls, ricocheting, and catching a lot of enemies in the crossfire. For me personally, something like Splitting Steel, as the first steel skill that you will get in the game pretty much straight away, is a lot of fun to use. It offers slightly unusual gameplay, which contributes to its appeal. Imagine a gameplay like Magneto from X-Men, who basically picked up steel rubble from all over the place, or any bits and pieces of steel, yeah, and then shredded his opponents by blasting them with those steel particles, with those little steel splinters. This is kind of how Splitting Steel builds feel, and why they are a lot of fun, at least in my subjective opinion. The main damage of the build itself comes from projectile hits, which are multiplied into critical strikes, and the massive amount of impale effects going around that cause reflected damage, reflected physical damage. Splitting Steel can be used on different class chassis, so to speak, in Path of Exile, but from my experience and research, Duelist Champion seems to be the most popular and winning platform, so to speak, for these builds, mainly because of awesome durability and tankiness that comes with this Ascendancy class. So the main defensive layers then of the build will come from massive amounts of armor, boosted by the Champion Ascendancy, Determination Aura that we will be running, and Permanent Fortification effect, which reduces the damage by 20%. It also is fully immune to stuns, this build, and in some end game configurations it would also be, the survivability would also be boosted by the evasion coming from Grace Aura and some passive skill tree skills that we would take. From my personal experiments and seeing what people are doing out there, I've seen this build done in 3 different ways: dual wielding, sword and board, so sword and shield, and with one massive two-hander weapon. Obviously, this choice will change the look and priorities of your passive skill tree, as some notable skill points only contribute to one of those styles of playing. So Sword and the Shield would offer you obviously more survivability but slightly less damage. And Dual Wielding seems to be the most popular choice for damage front-loading versions of this steel-based champion. I personally experimented with one large two-hander sword and haven't reached the end game with my Splitting Steel champion in this League 3.17 yet. I've only gotten to level 50 due to my real-life time constraints. I haven't had much time to play basically, but I can tell you that the build feels great. It's definitely playable, definitely very enjoyable with a two-hander, and something that I would very seriously consider as a choice of an alternative league starter for 3.18 Sentinel expansion. It's perhaps a little less straightforward than your typical bow-based, let's say projectile-based ranger build, but this is where the fun factor comes into play and kinda trumps everything. And, you know, things like Toxic Rain and Bleeding Bow builds, something like that, just become a bit too boring compared to this. For me personally, subjectively. Especially if we also remind ourselves that the Duelist champion is a lot more tanky and less random in mitigating damage that almost any avoidance, pure avoidance-based ranger or shadow build feel like. So these are my thoughts anyway. It was intended to be as a very quick overview check-in video on how we're approaching the 3.18 next expansion and what thoughts I'm having about the new preparation of new league status for you, my friends. Please talk to me in the comments down below. Let me know, what do you think? Have you played Splitting Steel in 3.17 or in the leagues before, in the expansions leading up to this point? And what do you think specifically about the potential of Splitting Steel champion being among at least my top recommended 3, let's say, league starters for 3.18? Unless we experience some massive spanners in the works with any basically balance changes that might affect steel skills negatively in 3.18. Unless that happens, would you be interested in Splitting Steel champion being properly reviewed and a guide from me? So thank you very much for tuning in into this very short video. Hopefully I made my message very loud and clear and it resonated with some of you. Like the video if it did, and if you want more people to see it, because that's how YouTube algorithm works, let's not ignore it. Subscribe for more, and I will talk to you next time.